Hello, one and all. My name is Ron Cook. Today's lecture is entitled American Marxism. This will be the introduction to a series of lectures, probably about two or three total, and it's the progressive era and progressivism. This is for an undergraduate course, History 201, which the totality of the course will cover pretty much the end of Reconstruction, the beginning of the Progressive Era to contemporary America. And today we are going to introduce the Progressive Era and progressivism. And I'll be using sections from some of my previous writing for the lecture. The full text to all of this with the attached sources will be with the video. So if you need to reference any of this for notes, etc., it will all be there to study from. Any questions, as always, I'll be available by email, by phone, or in the format you can throw questions publicly if you so choose to. So let's jump right into it here. Okay, so the late 19th and early 20th century time frame brought to the forefront of American political, philosophical, and religious and economical thought and policy a new ideal, Marxism. As the children of upper-class American religious reformers became rebellious youth, they would travel to Europe to learn a new religion, progressivism. Attending German, French, and British graduate schools, this group of zealots would return to American shores ready to reform the country and indeed the world. It was time for the country to throw off old ideals of individualism, republican democracy, free market capitalism, and empirical science. The mantra of these intellectuals was that of Darwinian scientism, collectivism, and above all else, state control of medicine, the economy, and academia. This was, in short, European Marxism dressed up and renamed progressivism. History itself is the art and science of arguing with the past. Interpretation, evidence, relevancy, and honesty are the foundation upon which these arguments are to be made. Unfortunately, this has not always been the case in the historiography and history of America. Typically, what is presented is the progressive history of the United States in nearly every classroom across the country. With a whimsical stroke of the pen, American history in the textbooks exits the Civil War and becomes a tale of progress. This skewed version almost inevitably goes from the evils of slavery, the abstract follies of the Founding Fathers, to the bedlam of the Civil War and Reconstruction. From this point forward, something entirely odd takes place. According to contemporary textbooks in both lower and upper grade levels, on through the university, America became enlightened, not way back in the 18th century, but rather in the mid to late 19th century, with a culmination of this illumination during the early to mid 20th century. Progress was upon us and progressivism was born, a proclaimed new and groundbreaking ideology of the collective organism, state planning, and the infallible wisdom of the experts. These progressive zealots were continuously condemned in America as European socialists and Marxists, yet they stood their ground and professed to be nothing of the sort. In fact, these new ministers of truth would remark that there is nothing socialist and Marxist in following science, wanting to better society, and a society organized by those individuals best suited and highly educated in the high ideals of progress. Indeed, the progressives will go further and claim that the true, or at very least the unavoidable, progress of liberty was only to be found in progressivism. The differences between progressives of the 19th century and American socialists are nothing more than academic fluff and misdirection. The proclaimed tenets of American socialists in 1883 were collectivization, nationalization of commerce and production, and state control of medicine and education, which sounds very similar to the progressive platform of the same era. Europeans, in favor of liberty, free markets, and individualism, warned Americans 20 years earlier of the pitfalls of this Marxism. Alexis de Tocqueville had traveled the newly found United States and recorded his experiences and thoughts on America. Having seen the rise of socialism in Europe and closely attached to the failures of the French Revolution, de Tocqueville frequently delineates how Marxism is not only dangerous and unfair, but reveals why American ideals of capitalism and individualism are superior. He goes at depth into Marxist ideals that had formed in Europe and how these were already attempting to make their way into America. On the surface, what sentient being could possibly take issue with progressing human liberty? Furthermore, who could sincerely object to society being planned, organized, and implemented by the expert class? This was the sales pitch of progressivism in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Above all, this was not Marxism, but only a quest for moving American society forward towards excellence, objectivity, and purity. This seems to be the fundamental question, not only avoided in the historiography, but is somehow readily dismissed when one inquires as to how progressivism is simply not Marxism. Immediate refutations emerge, diving into long diatribes on various forms of socialism, communism, Maoism, post-structuralism, and revisionism. The question remains, are these not all just differing forms of Marxist thought, economics, and philosophy? To answer this question, one must first start at the roots of the progressive movement in the United States that was already forming during Reconstruction. Few have been as influential in solidifying progressive Marxism in the American dialectic as Richard T. Ely. The connections between progressivism and Marxism can be seen with clarity when looking at the infancy of the progressive movement. One of the initial proprietors of progressivism, Richard T. Ely, is hailed by the Wisconsin Historical Society as, quote, a major figure in American economics that played a primary role in establishing the University of Wisconsin's reputations as a leader in economics research and in the training of graduate experts in administration, economics, and state service. In fact, Ely was charged by the state superintendent of public instruction, Oliver E. Wells, in 1894 of teaching and supporting alien and revolutionary doctrines due to Ely's interest in socialism. Indeed, Ely, in his own writing, exposes his belief in the connection of progressivism and Marxism by stating that liberalism itself has paved the way to communism. This evolutionary ideal of the unwavering progression of society, rulership, and political structures towards perfection is not abstract for progressives, but foundational. As Ely puts it, progressives are altogether dissatisfied with the condition of society and share a common ground as political and economic reformers of bringing about socialist changes through a steady and prolonged radicalism. One can hardly read Ely's work and not readily see the tone, definitions, and solutions of the class struggle of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels being exuded by Ely as foundational to classical liberalism and Christianity, thus the social organism of America. Ely would, without haste, take his Marxian progressivism and begin training fresh American minds at Johns Hopkins University. In Ely's view, the political economy conjured up by Marx and Engels was a natural evolution from the free market of capitalism to one of state control through progressive experts. In a desire to correct the supposed failings of free market capitalism, Ely ventured to perfect these inadequacies through state administration and trained experts through a purportedly new form of collectivization. His denotation of classical liberalism and free market capitalism as the old way and the progressive statism as the new way of political economy is revealing. Not only does this show Ely's sleight of hand in defining both the free market and state control as evolutionary partners, they are not. It also alludes to Ely's beliefs in the social gospel replacing the old bourgeoisie Christian beliefs of liberty and individualism. Here again echoes the tenets of Marx and Engels in the Manifesto of the Communist Party and Das Kapital. In fact, at times, the similarities in Ely's writing and teaching are nearly identical to Marx and Engels' claims that all history is a story of class struggle destined to evolve into a socialist utopia. Ely was not alone in his venture in reforming the American landscape along progressive Marxist lines. In fact, progressive reformers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries agreed that their platforms were interchangeable and necessary towards leading the American Republic towards full socialism. And we'll go ahead and stop here. And again, the full text will be below the video. Thank everybody for watching, and we will pick this up next week.